Hello, this is Mike Kramer, Calibration Program Manager at Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, and want to welcome everyone to this month's webinar. As you can see from the topic, and actually I made a last-second change here. It was the overview of the changes to the new 17025 standard. I have inserted the word proposed because as of yet it is still not an official international standard. So once again, thank everybody for logging in. I hope we're not having any technical difficulties and everyone can hear me fine and to be able to see the presentation right now. So as always, this webinar is being recorded. So if you feel the need to go back and listen to it again, or perhaps you have a colleague that was unable to be with us this afternoon, it should be available on our website under the recorded webinar. I believe it's under the training tab, and I'll listen to the presentation in its entirety. Also, there's a wealth of information up there. We have going back a couple of years. These webinars, we practically do one almost every month. So if you see a topic that you might want to get a refresher on or get more in tune with, feel free to visit one of our other recorded webinars. Okay, like I said earlier, and this is my disclaimer for this presentation. The information from ISO, IEC, and DIS is draft international standards. So keep in mind this is still considered a draft. Was used in this presentation. This document is a draft circulated for comments and approval. It is therefore subject to change and may not be referred to as an international standard until published. So I actually have a copy of the draft international standard, and what's on my cover is what I have there. Actually, I understand there have been some comments that's been received. We are looking at probably at December of 2017 for this to officially become an international standard. However, as you can see, voting's underway and terminates on 3rd of March 2017. It's already gone through several, at least 2 committee drafts, so it's evolved into this process up until this point of this current draft international standard, which is what this presentation is being based on. So a little bit of overview about 17025, where we were, where we're going. Not a whole lot of activity actually within the standard. When I first got involved with this, it was originally Guide 25. Was what it was originally known as. 17025 was initially issued by the International Organization for Standardization in 1999. Since its initial release, a second release was made in 2005. After it was agreed that the need to have the quality system words more closely aligned with the 2000 version of ISO 9001. And you also see here later on in this presentation that the 9001 has quite an impact on the current draft international standard that we're looking at now. So it was revised in 2005. We jump ahead to October of 2013, where the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, its General Assembly, the Laboratory Committee, which is comprised of stakeholders, representatives of accrediting testing and calibration, testing and calibration, recommended that ILAC request that ISO, CASCO, establish a new work item to comprehensively revise 17025, 2005. Hence, a working group has been established, working group number is 44, and tasked with the revision of the standard titled Revision of 17025, ISO, IEC 17025, via the working group 44. According to the working group Working Group 44 work plan is expected that the revised version of the standard will be published mid-end 2017. It looks like this is based on comments that were received. We're probably looking at December of 2017 for this standard to be officially published. Okay. So when they first started looking at revising this standard, and it's quite a ways to go for a ISO standard not to undergo revision, 2005. Some of the main justifications in supporting 17025 included the standard and its terminology is outdated. The scope of the standard requires revisions and updating. What is a laboratory? And the activities undertaken. The current prescriptive approach is out of step with modern standard approaches, which are performance-based or process-based. You'll see that as we get into this presentation, where you see currently a laboratory shall have a procedure. You don't see that so much in the draft international standard. Big changes in partiality, and partiality needs to be addressed in a more informed way. A whole section has been added, much more emphasis put on impartiality. Subcontracting circumstances needs to be clarified. Traceability requirements should be expanded, clarified, along with more informed lines. Actually been a annex added to the draft, which gives information in regards to traceability. We'll be taking a look at that. Sampling and subsampling needs to be considered with more recognition that reliable test results are directly related to sampling. Also, the need for separating the testing and calibration specific requirements in the standards needs to be reconsidered. This day and age, I think, is probably the most prevalent. Just about every workstation I go to, every technician has access to a computer, more so than they did back in '99 and 2005. Hence, there should be more recognition of the use of computer systems, electronic records, and report issues, as well as remote issuing of results and reports. Going on assessments where technicians are actually out there with their laptops now. Not so much back in 2005, didn't see that too often, but it's not unusual now to have these things generated right on site. Software validation is allowed for its relevance to testing and results generation, as well as records management, and requires addressing. So there is some, we'll look on some informational requirements within the standard as far as software validation, kind of expanded on what's in the current version. And also the possibility that perhaps there's too many notes included in the current version, which makes it difficult to use. One thing, if you haven't looked at the draft, or this is your first introduction to the revisions and the highlights of the revisions that's going to be coming down the road at the end of the year, one thing that's going to jump out at you first is the format. The format of the new standard will be significantly changed to be more in line with ISO formatting guideline. The basic format is similar to other standards such as the inspection standard 17020, the certification standard 17065. It is expected, and it is, that the new standard, it will be aligned to 9001-2015 principles on resources and process. By following the new ISO 9001 philosophy, it requires less documented procedures and policies and focus more on the outcomes of the process. So currently, these are the main section items of the Draft International Standard. We don't see Section 4, Section 5, and then all the the subsections under there, like the 2005 version. We have two annexes there, Annex A and Annex B. We're going to go over each one of those. Give you a more broader perspective here, right from the table of contents of the draft. This is how it's aligned. So if anything else, if you've been operating under 17025, or let's take control of records, it's now 8.4. It's no longer 4.13. Complaints 7.9, no longer 4.8. So that's going to be significantly a significant change. Probably the one that's going to jump out at you first is the way it's laid out and the numbering system. Okay, the first thing I want to hit on, and go back there, down the very end there, you see a lot of those, beginning in Section 8, it goes over options. It goes over Option A. So, and this is actually from the informative section, Annex B, and clarifying what they are. So Option A lists the minimal requirements for implementation of the management system in the laboratory. So when 17025 was written, care was taken to incorporate all those requirements of 9001 that are relevant to the scope of the laboratory activities that are covered by the management systems. Laboratories that comply with Section 4 to 7 of ISO 17025 and implement Option A of Clause 8 will therefore also operate generally in accordance with the principles of 9001. So with Option A, all those elements, and we'll see exactly what they are again here on the next slide, would be subject to the assessment. And they were written to align with those requirements within 9001. We also have Option B. Option B allows laboratories to establish and maintain a management system in accordance with requirements to 9001 in a manner that supports and demonstrates the consistent fulfillment of clauses 4 through to 7 of 17025. Laboratories that implement Option B of the Clause 8 will therefore also operate in accordance with 9001. Conformity of the management system within which the laboratory operates to the requirements of ISO 9001 does not of itself demonstrate the competence of the laboratory to produce technical and valid data and results. This is accomplished through compliance with clauses 4 through 7. So what does that say? This is basic. What this is stating is if you're a lab and you are also certified with 9001, it takes it to establish that you're going to meet those requirements in Option 8. Excuse me, that Option 8 would be assessed toward. And these include management system documentation, control of the management system, control of records improvement, corrective action, internal audits, and management reviews. So in a nutshell, if you are also 9001 certified, and us as an accrediting body would have to decide on what type of objective evidence we're going to look at. Probably one of the key would be who is your registrar, looking at them and their who they are and what are their qualifications to be registering the lab to be 9001. Hence, when you're being assessed, objective evidence of fulfilling those may be your certificate of registration to 9001. As if you're on Option A, then you are not already 9001. Those would be subject to the 17025 assessment, and those elements closely align to the requirements within 9001. Hence, if you're not 9001 certified, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to fulfill Option If you are 9001, good chance you would be required through your 17025 accreditation to fulfill the requirements in option B. Okay, we're going to look now at some of the sections within the draft, some of the highlights, some of the things that are new. So I have a whole section here, 4.1, right off the bat with impartiality. So currently, impartiality is addressed in the 2005 version in 415. A couple things there. Been assessing labs of this since you were accredited to 2005. 415-B, have arrangements to ensure that its management and personnel are free from any undue internal and external commercial, financial, and other pressures and influence that may adversely affect the quality of their work. Kind of a broad statement there. D, have policies and procedures to avoid involvement in any activities that would diminish confidence in the competence, impartiality, judgment, or operational integrity. That's where we're at right now. And current draft under 414, the laboratory shall identify risk, and this is a key word. This comes up a lot in the new standard, identifying risk to its impartiality on an ongoing basis. This shall include those risks that arise from its activities or from its relationship or from the relationship of its personnel. However, such relationships do not necessarily present a laboratory with a risk of impartiality. There's a note there. A lot of times I might hear, well, what are you referring to, impartiality? A relationship that threatens the impartiality of the laboratory can be based on ownership, governance, management, personnel, shared resources, finances, contracts, marketing, and payment of sales commissions or other inducements for the referral of a new customer, etc. You can see it's much more deep here. It goes into a lot more detail than the current standard. And the key term risk rears its head here, right here, at the onset of the draft international standard in section 414. If a risk to impartiality is identified, the laboratory shall be able to demonstrate how it eliminates or minimizes such risks. So actually a new definition is impartiality. Exactly what is that? This is the presence of objectivity. A couple more notes. Defining objectivity. Objectivity is understood to mean that conflicts of interest do not exist or are resolved as to not adversely influence the activities of the laboratory. Another note there just gives other terms that can be used in conveying the element of impartiality are freedoms from conflict of interest, freedoms from bias, freedoms from prejudice, neutrality, fairness, open-mindedness, even-heartedness, detached and balanced. A couple notes to further identify exactly what impartiality and objectivity is all about here. Okay, confidentiality. 4.2, we have a whole new section here in regards to customer confidentiality. So basically everything that's in the current standard is still there, is still applicable. However, this is going to expand it, as you can see somewhat. Some of the key highlights are on this slide in regards to confidentiality. Bullet number 1 there, the laboratory shall be responsible through legally enforceable commitments for the management of all information obtained or created during the performance of laboratory activities. That's basically the contract. Information about the customer attained from sources other than the customer, from either a complainant, regulator, shall be confidential between the customer and the laboratory. The provider, source of this information, shall be confidential to the laboratory and shall not be shared with the customer unless agreed by the source. This expands somewhat. Currently, the standard revolves around customer confidentiality, whereas appears to be those folks who are providing testing or calibration services for. This expands it for. This could be a third party coming into the picture, provide perhaps a complainant against your lab there, and this is assuring that that confidentiality is also maintained. Lastly, bullet point 3 is personnel, including any committee members, contractors, personnel of external bodies, or individuals acting on the laboratory behalf, shall keep confidential all information obtained or created during the performance of laboratory activities, except as required by law. So in other words, if say you are accredited through PJLA, that would be us. That would be like, for example, a external source coming in there that you as a laboratory have to be sure that the confidentiality is going to be maintained through either us or anybody else who is coming in externally to look at and perhaps see information regarding to laboratory activities that needs to be kept confidential. So quite a bit of expansion on there. Section 4.2, customer confidentiality. Okay, currently proposed section 6.6. As a section, terminology is different, but it incorporates elements that you're used to seeing in 2005. And you'll have something called externally provided product and services. So what this is, it includes in both procurement and subcontracting are considered as externally provided services. So under the current standard, we have a section for purchasing. We also have a separate section for subcontracting. Right now, they're under the proposed draft, everything would be considered in those two categories under externally provided products and services. So there's no explicit reference to subcontracting anymore. External testing and calibration services are basically treated like external services. And all this is summarized in one section. Okay, 7.1. This is a section on review of request tenders and contracts. And a new concept, it's not actually a new concept, it's a new term that pops up in the new standard. It's called a decision rule. It's actually been in the old standard, but it was referred to as taking uncertainty into account is basically the best way I can describe it. So actually it appears here, not first in reporting the results. It appears here in section 7.1, review of request tenders and contracts. So currently under the draft, 7113, when the customer requests a statement of conformity to a specification or a standard for a test or calibration, in other words, they're looking for either a pass-fail or as being intolerant or out-of-tolerance specified. The specification of the standard and the decision rule shall be clearly defined unless inherited in the requested specification of the standard. The decision rule selected shall be communicated to the customer. So again, this has to be communicated during contract review. So you see a new definition is in the draft is decision rule. A rule that describes how measurement uncertainty will be accounted for when stating conformity with a specified requirement. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on here in the next couple slides. I'm going to jump right ahead to reporting the results because we're already talking about decision rule here, and it sort of correlates between this section and then what's actually going to be reported on the report. So decision rule is a rule that describes how measurement uncertainty will be accounted for when stating conformity with a specified requirement. So currently, 170-2005, under Section 510, which is reporting result, specifically for calibration labs 510.4.2, we have a broad statement on there. When statements of compliance are made, the uncertainty of measurements, and I highlighted shall be taken into account. So this is not new going into the new standard. It still needs to be taken into account. However, what's changed is it needs to be defined how it is being taken into account. So under 785, reporting statements of conformity, 785.1, when a statement of conformity to a specification or standard for a test or calibration is provided, the laboratory shall document the decision rule employed, taking into account the risk, such as false accept or false reject and statistical assumptions associated with the decision rule employed, and apply the decision rule. So here we see the word shall. Shall in this international standard is draft international standard is same thing as it was in 2005. The word shall is a requirement. Shall document the decision rule. So like I said previously, the old 510.4.2 basically stated uncertainty of measurement shall be taken into account. They still have to be taken into account, but have to basically document how they're being taken into account. 7852, the laboratory shall report on the statement of conformity such that the statement clearly identifies 7852C, the decision rules applied. There's a note there where the decision rule is prescribed by the customer, regulations, or normative documents. A further consideration of the risk level is not necessary. So a lot of things here on decision rules as far as being brought up during contract review and then actually reporting. So what exactly are we talking about? Those folks in calibration might be versed and probably have seen this slide before. Those of you that are just new to this hopefully will clarify what we're talking about. Those depicted at the top there are four different scenarios there. We have category 1, 2, and I apologize for that. The one right above the red line should be category 3, and then we have category 4. The dot in the middle there indicates a value. The two lines below and above each dot indicates the measurement uncertainty. Hence, that's a gray area there. You have a value, and then you have that gray area of uncertainty. So, for example, category 1, that red line, USL, means upper standard limits or tolerance or whatever you want to refer to. When you're stating pass or fail, that is the limit that we're looking for our calibration point not to exceed. So in that first category, we can see the point, the gray area there are clearly in the accept. Hence, that could definitely be a pass. The line above that, the point is passing. However, that gray area of uncertainty points it over to the failure. So we're not really sure if it actually passes or fails. So that's when we're taking measurement uncertainty into account. We can't clearly state a pass in that situation. The one above it is something that barely fails. Hence, uncertainty, however, pushes it over to the pass. So we can definitely say that that fails. And then category 4 there on the top, we have the point, and the uncertainty clearly falls outside the upper limit there, and it would safe to say that fails. So that's what we're referring to when we say taking measurement uncertainty into account. That gray area there, that those dots are that surround those dots, that needs to be taken into account. So little information I could pass on here concerning the decision rule is could be different approaches for each of those conditions. The implementation of guard banding, for example, could be beneficial. And there's references out there. There's a few here that are listed on this page. And this is a change in going into when the standard is official. We're doing these webinars, doing pretty much a broad perspective right now on some of the proposed changes. Perhaps when this standard is released, maybe digging down on some of these webinars on some of the new requirements and digging down a little bit deeper. And this might be one of those areas. Okay, so we're still in reporting the results. I just wanted to correlate the decision rule, the two areas that they apply to close to each other in these presentations. But there's other things in reporting the results. 781, each report shall include at least the following information unless the laboratory has a valid reason for not doing so, thereby minimizing any possibility of understanding or misuse. Now, highlighted area is different. That's an addition. And what's changed, this is currently there's a list of common elements for calibration and testing lab, things like data test, the name and function of the individual authorizing the report. Something's been added there is the date of issue of the report. That is the date you actually release the report to your customer. So that's an addition. This next one here is probably more prevalent for testing laboratories. The laboratory shall be responsible for all information provided in the test report or calibration certificate, except when information is provided by the customer. When that is provided by the customer, there shall be a clear identification of it. In addition, a disclaimer shall be put on the report when the information is supplied by the customer and can affect the validity of the test or calibration results. Where the laboratory has not been responsible for the sampling stage, for example, the sample is provided by the customer, it shall state on the report that the results applied to the sample as received. And that's the part that's more prevalent for testing labs, the sampling section. The whole standard, the whole section there would be applicable to both. It could be some various circumstances where the customer is actually having input, and that input may have a direct impact on the test or calibration results. If so, it needs to be documented. Now, sample, that's kind of interesting. Going into the testing labs, you see samples. Currently 17025 has a whole section on sampling. Where does that sample come from? In certain cases, these samples are sent into the lab by the customer. So if you're a testing lab, you really don't, that's out of your control. You don't know if that sample is a replica sample of a population or a subsample or a replica subsample of a larger sample. Hence, you're testing what the customer provides. Hence, that needs to be stated on the report that that sample was as received by your customer. So, clarification there. 7841, calibration certificate shall include, and this is something I think that ought to be included anyway, the measurement uncertainty of the measurement results presented in the same unit of the measured, and or a term relative to the measured. You can still use a percentage there, but you're not comparing ounces to grams or Celsius to Fahrenheit or whatever the units may be. They have to be in like units. Micropounds to milligrams is something I have seen before. That would have to be either one or the other. Alrighty, still on reporting the results. When reported information associated with a calibration includes a statement of conformity with a specification, omitting the measured result and associated uncertainty, the reported information shall include a statement that data is not intended to be used in support of the further dissemination of metrological traceability. In other words, you're calibrating something that's going to be used to calibrate something else. And actually, we sort of, we do address this in our PL3 policy on measurement uncertainty. Currently, the standard states you have to report the measured value and the associated uncertainty or compliant with the metrological specification. So, in other words, if you are reporting a value without the actual uncertainty, and you're reporting compliance to a metrological specification, you need to determine during contract review whether or not that device is going to be used to calibrate other devices. So by the mere definition of traceability, or each one of those links are a traceability link, the further you get away from NIST and to the SI, those links ideally will be getting bigger because you're adding measurement uncertainty there because they build upon one another. If you report a calibration without an actual uncertainty, and that calibration is going to be used for other calibrations, hence that's not going to be considered a traceable calibration because it does not have an associated measurement uncertainty associated with it. And actually, if you're an accredited calibration lab, that's something that you would definitely need because you would be promoting traceability. That would be a component of yours. Sort of getting a little bit off bases there. But basically, if it's not included right now, that statement needs to be put on there and should be clarified during contract review. Alrighty, going to move on to section 7.2, selection, verification, and validation of methods. Everything currently in the standard is pretty much still intact. Something that's new is the expansion of validation and objective evidence that needs to be seen. Goes into detail. If you need to validate a method, i.e. you're not using something that's nationally recognized or you're deviating from it, or if it's something you have developed yourself in-house, you need to validate it. So right now, under the current draft, it's very specific on what objective evidence needs to be recorded, the validation procedure used, specification of the requirements, determination of the performance characteristics of the methods, results obtained, verification that the requirements can be fulfilled using the method, and a statement of validity of the method detailing its fitness for the intended use. So again, this is an expansion on what's currently in the 2005. So if you are having to validate a method, you need to be recording all in future tense anyway, once you are, you do fall under the umbrella of the draft international standard, which will be an international standard here. You're going to be required to record and obtain this information. Something I brought out here is under records. And one of the biggest changes from 2005 to today is the use of computers. Not seeing too many handwritten data sheets anymore. Even logbooks and things that we were typically writing on has gone to the wayside of electronic media. So the old 41323, which is still current, and I still make a point if I do see someone writing down, and if they do make a mistake or I'm looking at a logbook that's written, this is still in effect. When mistakes occur in records, each mistake shall be crossed out, not erased, made illegible, or deleted, and the correct value entered alongside. All such alteration to records shall be signed and initialed by the person making the corrective. In the case of records stored electronically, equivalent measures shall be taken to avoid change of original data. So a very prescriptive approach that's within 17025 as to what needs to be done when a mistake is made. Under the new draft international standard, basically the laboratory shall ensure that amendments to technical records can be tracked back to the previous version and to the original observation. Both the original and amended data and files shall, including indication of the altered aspect of those responsible for alterations. So not so prescriptive there. It's up to the lab to determine how it's going to comply. If you still utilize and bring forward what you're using in the old standard and still apply it to the new standard, I would say you're still complying, but you're not tied down to doing that. Okay, 7-Eleven, another area that's been added. So added new requirements here for under 7-Eleven, control of data, information management. Information management, an added requirement, 7-Eleven 2. The laboratory information management system used for the collection, processing, recording, reporting, storage, or retrieval of data shall be validated for functionality, including the proper functioning of interfaces within the laboratory information management system by the laboratory before being introduced. Whenever there are any changes, including laboratory software configuration modifications to commercial off-the-shelf software. So this is software validation. Of course, if you're writing your own software, you're utilizing your own software, you still need to validate it. Currently in 17025, it states that commercially off-the-shelf software is determined to be already sufficiently validated. However, what's been written into the standard is in those cases where this commercially off-the-shelf software may have been altered by somehow by the user. If something is done to modify that software, then it is subjected to a validation. Also added, quite often I see the information management is something that is outsourced. Have somebody coming in to your facility and taking care of your information system needs. So when the laboratory information management system are managed and maintained off-site or through an external provider, the laboratory shall ensure the provider or operator of the system complies with all applicable requirements of this international standard. What comes to mind foremost is the whole requirement concerning customer confidentiality, protection of the data that's stored up there. 7-11-5, I can vouch for this one. The laboratory shall ensure that instructions, manuals, and reference data relevant to laboratory information management system are made available to personnel. I said I can sort of vouch for it. During the current assessment, of course, that information needs to be protected, backed up, secured. And when that is asked, say during an assessment, it should be just one answer. Should be no uncertainty as to, yeah, we think it's backed up every week, but not sure. That information is going to have to be available via instruction manual or reference data on site there and available to personnel. Okay, risk and opportunity. This is new within 17025. As I prefix the 17025, the draft international standard requires laboratories to plan and implement actions to address risk and opportunities. Addressing both risk and opportunities establish a basis for increasing the effectiveness of the management system, achieving improved results and preventing negative effects. The laboratory is responsible for deciding which risks and opportunities need to be addressed. So as we got under management require 8.5, we have a new section here, actions to address risk and opportunities. And we have the word shall there. The laboratory shall consider the risk and opportunities associated with the laboratory activities in order to give assurance that the management system can achieve its intended results, enhance opportunities to achieve the purpose and objectives of the laboratory, prevent or reduce undesired impact and potential failures in the laboratory activities, and achieve improvement. Also, the laboratory shall plan actions to address these risks and opportunities and how to integrate and implement the actions into the management system and evaluate the effectiveness of these actions. So I said this is new within 17025. Those of you that are operating under 9001, this is already incorporated into your quality management system. But it is a new section, and there's a lot of emphasis put on risk and opportunity in the draft 17025 standard. Actually, management reviews. Management reviews are still there in the new standard. There's been a new line item though. So surprise, surprise, the inputs to management reviews shall be recorded and include information related to the following. And something that's been added is results of risk identification. All right, one section that's really been expanded on is complaints. Currently, section 4.8 and 17025 is one section, is one basically line item. The laboratory shall have a policy and procedure for the resolution of complaints received from other parties. Records shall be maintained of all complaints and the investigation of corrective action taken by the laboratory. So basically, if I'm an assessor, I'm looking for a record. I'm looking for a policy and procedure, not a whole lot of other information here. One thing, a complaint, what is it? It's the definition is actually within the draft standard. It's the expression of dissatisfaction by any person or organization to a laboratory relating to the activities of results of that laboratory where a response is expected. So as you can see, it's a lot more detail here in regards to the requirements with complaints. It requires a process. The process includes 792, a description of the handling process of complaints shall be available to any interested party or on request. An assessor for your 17025 accreditation might very well be one of those interested parties that might request it. Upon receipt of the complaint, the laboratory shall confirm whether the complainant relates to laboratory activity that it has a responsibility for, and if so, shall deal with it. The laboratory shall be responsible for all levels of the handling of the process of complaints. 793, the process for handling complaints shall include at least the following elements: a description of the process for receiving, validating, investigating the complaint, and deciding what actions are to be taken in response to it. Tracking and recording complaints, including actions taken to resolve them. Ensuring that any appropriate action is taken. The laboratory receiving the complaint shall be responsible for gathering information and verifying all necessary information to validate the complaint. Whenever possible, shall acknowledge receipt of the complaint and provide the complainant with a progress report and the outcome. The outcomes will be communicated to the complainant, shall be made by or reviewed and approved by individuals not involved in the original laboratory activities in question. Whenever possible, the laboratory shall give formal notice of the end of the complaint handling to the complainant. Okay, so there's been complaints are still there. As you can see, it's much more detailed now. After running through the process has to address all these elements that we just went over. So once again, new documentation requirements have been introduced. We have reduced procedural requirements in the management section. By following the new 9001 philosophy, it requires less documented procedure and policies and focus more on the outcome of processes. 9001 is fairly new. It's well, it's not new. It's just currently is under was recently revised in 2015. So these requirements for not having the need for actual documented procedures is relatively new in 9001 as well. So some examples of this: a laboratory no longer requires a lab to maintain current job descriptions, but focus more on communicating to each person their duties, responsibilities, and authorities. So the draft international version is states the lab shall document the competence required for each function, influence the results of laboratory activities, including requirements for education, qualifications, training, technical knowledge, skills, and experience. Document control broadly. 431, the laboratory shall establish and maintain procedures to control all documents that form part of the management system, both internal and external, such as regulation standards, other normative documents, test and/or calibration method, as well as drawings, software specifications, instructions, and manuals. It goes on and under the current, it goes into what the procedure has to ensure. Currently, under the draft version, simply under 831, the laboratory shall control the documents, both internal and external, that relates to the fulfillment of this international standard. Hence, there's nothing in place there about actually having to have a procedure. Just have to ensure that they fulfill the requirements of 17025. All right, some other overview of changes, and actually the very top of the line, and I bolded that, and this sort of had to do a double take when I first heard this, that under the current draft standard, a quality manual is not required anymore. No obligation to formally appoint a quality manager. Instead, obligation to employ, instruct, and support appropriate persons. That's right, no longer a quality manual is required. Obsolete terms: quality manager, and technical manager. So you're aware currently the standards state that they shall be defined in the quality manual. Hence, no longer there's a requirement for the laboratory, for a quality manual. What is new in the new standard is that the laboratory shall identify management who has overall responsibility for the laboratory. Accommodations now is going to be referred to as facility. Term has gone away, but it's just still within the standard. Is preventive action. That's now going to be under the section on opportunities. So what you referred to before as preventive action will be encompassed under opportunities. You'll no longer see that term. Some of the new definitions include laboratory, intra-lab comparison. Also, the proficiency testing is also, and interlab is also included in those definitions. Decision rule and impartiality are new definitions. Okay, I mentioned something at the beginning of the presentation about the annexes. One that's been added is Annex A. That's metrological traceability. It's informative. And just looking at it and reviewing it, and those folks of you that are currently accredited with us are familiar with PL2. Looking at the index, it closely correlates to the requirements already specified in PL2, which recognizes the use of 17025 accredited sources or producing objective evidence in regards to the 6 elements of traceability. Hence, if you're using a facility who's accredited to do the calibration and are under a accrediting body under the ILAC MRA, I always say that's a slam dunk. That's considered an accredited calibration. You cannot be accredited but can still produce accredited results. The lab needs to, and this is specified in the annex, the elements of traceability that would need to be presented in order to consider them as being traceable. Something that's been added into the traceability, and this is an annex. Annex A, the symptomatic measurement error or the bias of the calibration equipment is taken into account when it is used to disseminate metrological traceability to the measured result in the laboratory. There are several mechanisms available to account the symptomatic measurement errors in the dissemination of measurement traceability. I included a sample back there. I'm familiar with an ISTIR 6969, SOP9, and that's for the calibration of mass standards, defined bias, and actually has a procedure there in order to quantify biases. Leave that up there for a second, have you all look at that. Okay, that's the overview. They're the highlights that I've seen. So I've touched on them. I don't think I went over considerable detail on any one of them. Gave a pretty broad perspective of the overview using the draft standard. If you're interested, the draft can be purchased. It's the website's right there. It's through the ISO store, actually. Now, probably a question that's on every mind is, okay, when this thing comes out, what does that mean for me as an accredited facility? Well, we realize there's going to be a transition period. There's going to be a transition period for us at VJLA, have our assessors come up to speed on the new standard and what we're looking for. So in a nutshell, the way we're projecting this is, again, it looks like it's going to be December of 2017 before this is finally becomes an international standard. We're looking at a transition period for 3 years. So what this means, if you're already accredited to the 2005 version, you can still maintain your accreditation to the 2005 version. However, within up to a 3-year period, you would have to transition over to the 2017 version. So it's not like we're going to come in there, do your next assessment and expect you to be up and running with the 2017 requirements. There's a transition period. If any new lab is coming on board, once the standard is written, I'm fairly certain that you will not be able to be accredited to the old version. New labs would have to be accredited to the new 2017 version. Okay, that's all I have. I want to thank you all for listening. Now, as always, we're going to allocate some time for questions. I have folks at our headquarters in Troy, Michigan going to help me out with this. I'll answer these when I get them in the best of my ability. I might not be sure on some of them. Like I said, it is still a draft standard. You should have a space provided for submitting questions. So I'm going to go silent here for about 5 minutes. Our headquarters will send me some questions, and I'll chime back in and try to to answer as many as possible. So without further ado, I'll give you an opportunity to ask some questions here. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I've got a few questions here. Go through these. A comment here. Great to know that subcontracting is no more. The term has gone away, but the still incorporated under the externally provided services. Just don't have that term. Control software or not in which section of the new standard? Well, I'm not mistaken, that is under 7.5 technical records. I'm sorry, 7.11 is control of data. That's information management. And actually, it's also specified on this slide under that what section that was covered under. Big change in there is if you altered off-the-shelf software, then you have to validate them again. Can the slides from this webinar be provided to registrants? Yeah, I mean, this slide is going to be available. If you might have missed the first part of this presentation, they're going to be available on our website online under the resource, under our training tab, past webinars, and there's various other presentations there as well, but hopefully shortly after this presentation. This next one, I'm going to defer to our salespeople, or I probably need to call our office because your lab is planning on applying for accreditation in June. Would you recommend waiting till the new standards are published? Really don't want to make a recommendation. I don't know what your situation is. One thing I can tell you is once you are accredited, you can still keep that accreditation for 3 years. Then you're going to have to comply with the new standard. A lot of even if you do have procedures and things like that in place, if they work for you, you can still utilize them. They're just not required in the new standard anymore. So I would call our office and ask that question. I don't want to lead you astray. I don't know what your particular circumstance. You might have customers that are requiring you to have this accreditation. I was interrupted during one of the slides. The only part I caught was the quality manual no longer. QM, I guess that's quality manual, no longer be necessary. That's true. That was an eye-opener to me at first. Another question, will the slides be available afterwards? Again, yes, on our website under past webinars. Bear with me a minute. Let me go back on to this next one. This is a hypothetical situation regarding impartiality. How detailed, how much investigation, or is it as we become aware of risks, such as an employee that may not care for the practices of a company that happens to be our customer, yet this employee is not involved in any generation of data? I would say that, well, it's specified over the slide there, one of the changes, that the lab needs to address the risk and identify and take appropriate actions. If that's going to alleviate the risk, as an assessor, I'm thinking that would be a question I would broadly ask, and how would this eliminate the impartiality and the impact of that on that particular test for that particular customer. Are there going to be changes to ANSI Z540? I don't know that. I don't know if this is going to have an effect on that. This bias has to be determined and mathematically taken into account for every calibration once the new standard goes into effect. It only needs to be taken into account, and I would say, just from the information that I'm being presented with, and like I said, we got to get behind the 8 ball ourselves at the accreditation level on here, specifies it needs to be taken into account if it's going to be used to disseminate further meteorological traceability. In other words, it's going to be used to calibrate devices that are going to be used to calibrate other devices. I said that's probably, well, as we move past this becoming a draft standard, an official standard, probably dig down further, investigate some of these ourselves, and take some of these individual line items and take it from there. Okay, that is all I have as far as questions. I hope the presentation didn't raise any eyebrows or seem confusing. It's going to change. It hasn't changed since 2005. Some of the changes are going to be significant. There's some new items that are going to have to be addressed. Let's go ahead and sign off. We do have our next webinar already scheduled for next month, March 16th. Non-conforming testing calibration. What is it and what are the requirements? Well, it might be one of the areas. I'll look at that area more in depth, because still considering this will still be a draft. Probably try to crosswalk the two in more one-to-one as far as the next presentation on non-conforming testing calibration. What it is, that's not going to change. It is what it is, but might look at the two standards and delve in a little deeper as to what the differences are. So I want to thank everybody for signing in and being with us this afternoon. Hope to see you all in March. Thank you.